What do you make of this? What does it say to you? How much longer can this lot get away with this catalogue, this absolute avalanche of appalling behaviour? This is actually a good day for British democracy, because despite his best efforts to wriggle off the hook, he hasn't. When Priti Patel was found to have breached the ministerial code with regard to bullying, remember, Boris Johnson left her in post and accepted the resignation of the independent advisor who had found her guilty of bullying. It's very easy to gloss over those moments on our national decline, because obviously so much of the media was encouraging you to look the other way or pretending that it was in any way acceptable conduct. Such was the cult of Boris Johnson, and do make sure you've got your teeth in before deploying that phrase in the wild today. These were moments of national catastrophe. Whatever your politics are, I appreciate, and I don't think I'm going to bend over backwards to be polite today. If you are too stupid or too biased to realise that even if it's your lot doing it, the damage to democracy affects us all, then you're probably still listening to the wrong programme. But when Dominic Cummings lied brazenly and blatantly about driving to Barnard Castle on his wife's birthday to visit a local beauty spot, or in direct breach of coronavirus regulations, and then claimed that it was to test his eyesight before going on an even longer drive, they were all laughing at you, especially if you have got lots of flags in your Twitter profile and Forever Boris as your hashtag. That you are the people they laugh at loudest. You are the people who they wait for you to leave the room and then collapse in fits of giggles like Queen Elizabeth, Melchett and Nursey in an episode of Blackadder 2. You are the people they hate the most, and you are the people they laugh at, still waving your pathetic little Brexit flags and claiming that Boris Johnson got it done. They despise you. And the extent of that hatred is on display when people like Priti Patel keep their jobs despite being bullies, when people like Suella Braverman get their jobs back despite breaking the ministerial code. And that's why it's taken so long for Raab to go. Make no mistake, this would have been an exercise in wriggling, a desperate exercise with or without Sunak's connivance, although given what he did with Suella Braverman, it seems to me perfectly plausible he'd have been part of an Operation Save Raab. That's what they've done. That's why it's taken so long. You remember Operation Save Owen Paterson after he was found to have breached the parliamentary code. They assembled whatever the opposite of the Avengers would be in a desperate attempt to save his career. Jacob Rees-Mogg inevitably in the driving seat. Boris Johnson inevitably pulling the strings. People like Charles Moore at the Daily Telegraph inevitably writing articles about how unfairly Owen Paterson had been treated. Because I'll tell you one inalienable truth about the last few years of British politics. Everybody who accuses the other lot of being sore losers or of being snowflakes or of being thin-skinned or of being hypersensitive are the biggest whining, mewling, puking infants you could ever encounter in a million years in public life. Oh, it wasn't me. Oh, it's not fair. Oh, I didn't mean it. Oh, can he have his job back? Oh, I was testing my eyesight. Oh, let's form a circle around the Pritzker. Oh, Nadine Dorries. Oh, they are absolutely tragic. And whatever your politics, if you've got 3 brain cells, there will come a day sooner rather than later when you realise what's been done to you by the people you thought were on your side. So today is a good day because the wriggle has failed. An administration that's already demonstrated a degree of contempt for the ministerial code has found itself in a position where it cannot ignore the ministerial code. A man who pledged to resign if he was found to have been a bully has resigned because he's been found to have been a bully. But here we still are. At the end of this, I suspect I will, and he'll probably be back. You know, it's not like you and me getting a kicking or getting our sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. He did. Another thing I find odd at times like this is how they segue effortlessly to the back benches. How would you feel about that? Your boss has been demoted for bullying you, and now he sits next to you in the office. Now he works next to you in the factory. Doesn't quite ring true, does it? Sling him out. Stick him on the slag heap. Hand him his sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap. I will probably at the end of this contemplation ask you what you make of it all, but I'm going to begin by going through the letter with a degree, I hope, of depth. Dear Prime Minister, that's fairly uncontroversial. I am writing to resign from your government following receipt of the report arising from the inquiry conducted by Adam Tory, KC. Full stop. Off letter now. I am writing to resign from your government some 24 hours after receiving the report from Adam Tory, KC, during which time I have wriggled violently in a desperate attempt to get off the hook of the consequences of my own conduct in exactly the same way that so many of my colleagues have done since Brexit. From Priti Patel to Dominic Cummings to Suella Braverman to Owen Paterson, I have engaged in a long and fruitful post-Brexit Conservative tradition of desperately trying to evade any responsibility whatsoever for my proven actions, for the consequences of my proven actions. We continue. I called for the inquiry and undertook to resign if it made any finding of bullying whatsoever. Off the letter again. This at the time was the only way in which I could conceivably cling on to my job after civil servants queued up in numbers to accuse me of all manner of abuses, including some which had reportedly left colleagues suicidal. I, however, Dominic Raab, am the real victim here. I didn't expect to resign because I served in a government that allowed Priti Patel to keep her job after she'd been found guilty of bullying. I served in a government that allowed Dominic Cummings to keep his job after he was found guilty of breaking lockdown laws that he'd helped to implement on a blatant and brazen scale. I served in the government that became the address at which more criminal breaches of lockdown laws were committed than any other address in the country. And I saw Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak receive fines for that behaviour and behave as if nothing untoward had happened at all. I didn't think I'd have to resign because I am Deputy Prime Minister in a government that gets its testicles tickled by right-wing newspapers every morning instead of being held to account for the most obvious and egregious breaches of the most basic and simple traditions and supporters of British democracy. I didn't expect to resign. I expected front pages on the Daily Mail describing how it was a damp squib, or how it was a witch hunt, or how they were unfairly going after Big Bad Dom. I didn't expect to resign when I pledged to resign, but hey-ho, here I am. Next sentence. I believe it is important to keep my word. I believe it is important to keep my word. Wait, was he Deputy Prime Minister to Boris Johnson? He was, wasn't he? I, a man who served as Deputy Prime Minister to Boris Johnson, believe it is important to keep my word. Whew. Good God, we've fallen so far. Paragraph 2. It has been a privilege to serve you as Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary and Lord Chancellor. Positions which I shamefully clung on to while this inquiry was being conducted. Anybody in the Labour Party at the moment, led by that man that you childishly describe as Sir Softy, gets suspended at the first suggestion of the kind of conduct I've now been found guilty of, but you saw fit to leave me in post for months while this investigation was being conducted and while the victims of my appalling abuses and bullying were left wondering whether they were going to receive any justice whatsoever. But I am also the Justice Secretary responsible for the biggest backlog in history in our courts, while claiming publicly that I'm somehow making progress in that field. I believe it is important to keep my word, says a man who lied about the judicial system, court backlogs, and, of course, lawyers in general. Back to the letter. I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to work as a minister in a range of roles and departments since 2015 and pay tribute to the many outstanding civil servants with whom I have worked. I appreciate that without Brexit breaking pretty much every requirement of competence or decency on the part of Conservative politicians, I would never have got off the bench. But thanks to Brexit, I managed to be promoted far beyond my capabilities and somehow ended up not just in the cabinet, but also Foreign Secretary when I accidentally stayed on the beach while Kabul fell and then lied about the sea being closed, and Deputy Prime Minister. Whilst I feel duty-bound to accept the outcome of the inquiry, it dismissed all but two of the claims levelled against me. Please don't look at the accusations and allegations that have been found to be true. Concentrate instead on the ones that have not been found to be true, whether due to lack of evidence or some other technicality. I would rather not focus on the fact that I'm guilty, but focus instead on the things that I haven't been found guilty of. This despite the fact that I'm a trained lawyer. Never in my legal career have I stood up in court and responded to a verdict by pointing out the charges that have not been found guilty and urging the judge to concentrate instead on the charges. Well, you can fill in the gaps there. I also believe that its two adverse findings are flawed and set a dangerous precedent for the conduct of good government. I have not got a Scooby-Doo what the conduct of good government looks like, because I've been part of the two, well, actually I don't think he had a role in Truss's government, did he? But I've certainly been part of two of the three worst governments in the history of the United Kingdom. Indeed, I was Deputy Prime Minister in both of them. But I'm going to bleat meaninglessly today about the importance of the conduct of good government without mentioning that I was party to some of the most obvious and egregious breaches of both the Ministerial Code and the Parliamentary Code of Ethics, without ever saying a single word in protest. It's 10:15. First, ministers must be able to exercise direct oversight with respect to senior officials over critical negotiations conducted on behalf of the British people. Otherwise, the democratic and constitutional principle of ministerial responsibility will be lost. Says a man who resigned as a minister shortly after revealing that he accepted the job as Brexit secretary without actually appreciating the importance of the crossing between Dover and Calais to the import and export of goods into and out of the United Kingdom. That's a level of stupidity that is beyond parody. That is Nadine Dorries level stupidity. But the man is arguably too dim to realise the awfulness of his own admission. This was particularly true during my time as Foreign Secretary in the context of the Brexit negotiations over Gibraltar, when a senior diplomat breached the mandate agreed by Cabinet. Pour me a drink, says Dominic Raab. Not mentioning, of course, his greatest hits as Foreign Secretary, up to and including the time that he declined to come back from his holiday while Kabul fell, and Afghan translators and other professionals who had actually helped the British keep the Taliban at bay were effectively abandoned.